a circle which says grabar en este equipo e grabar en la nube? No, that's not it. No, the sign doesn't appear.
Buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos. Este es un nuevo espacio de Pensando Educación. El día de hoy tenemos como invitado al profesor Vadim Oswald. Va a estar acompañado por la profesora Nancy Palacios de la Facultad de Educación y por la profesora Tatiana Luis de la Facultad de Ciencias Sociales. Los voy a dejar un momento con Nancy para que nos presente el profesor y nos presente un poco la explicación de este espacio y luego vamos a tener la presentación del profesor Vadim. Nos pueden dejar a través del chat de WhatsApp, de Zoom o de YouTube las preguntas que vayan surgiendo. Y bienvenido, profesor. Y Nancy, quedamos contigo. Muchas gracias.
Vale, muy buenas tardes. ¿Se escucha bien?
I still haven't got the translation knob, sorry. It
Lo
must.
primero que vamos a hacer es darle la bienvenida al profesor Badina Colombia, agradecer un esfuerzo con Tatiana Luis de Ciencias Sociales del Departamento de Lenguas por invitarlo a Colombia. El profesor Badin trabaja sobre libros de texto de historia desde una perspectiva multinacional y multilingüe. Resulta que nosotras, pues tanto Tatiana como yo, venimos trabajando sobre libros de texto centrados en un análisis más del nivel cognitivo en mi caso, en el caso de Tatiana más en la narrativa, en el contenido y la perspectiva de los libros. Agradeciendo entonces la iniciativa de Pensadores del Mundo, hemos invitado al profe Oswald Badin y es para nosotros es pues una alegría que esté en Colombia, que esté en la Universidad de los Andes y quisimos que tuviera un espacio en la Facultad de Educación. Gracias a todas las personas pues que han permitido, que han facilitado este espacio. Vamos sin más introducciones a escuchar al profesor porque ya estamos un poco pasados con la hora. Entonces, adelante con la presentación, profe, por favor. Muchas gracias por atender la invitación de la Universidad de los Andes. Y gracias, Tatiana, por toda esta labor de facilitación. Gracias a todos los que han aceptado la invitación a este espacio de Pensando Educación.
Yes, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, teacher.
Yeah.
I listen.
Thank you, Nancy, for the invitation to speak also in this context and seminar. I have to say that the knob for the languages hasn't appeared, but I could follow. So so far I know what has been said, but probably for the understanding all the questions, it would be great to find a way then for me to hear the translation. And I would like to ask Tanya if I'm getting too fast. Please tell me. Yeah, I know that translations when the speaker starts to speak very fast, then this is a problem for the parallel translation. So you can all see my presentation, I hope. You have it and you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
You can see your presentation.
Good. Great. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. I've been invited to the Universidad de los Andes as part of the Pensador del Mundo program, which makes me feel very honored. Therefore, I have chosen a topic for this lecture that looks at textbook development in a global dimension. It is also closely related to my research activities. We have examined, moment, We have examined in questions of international historical education in various contexts in relation to extracurricular education or in comparing the contents and designs of maps in European history school atlases from 36 European states. Here you can see the poster of our research projects. I will refer to these projects also in my speech. In 2016, the Polish and German foreign ministers presented the first volume of a new textbook. The presence of political prominence at this event made it clear that this was a special textbook, a textbook for the subject of history to be used equally in lessons in both Germany and Poland. This four-volume textbook was intended to teach history in both nations according to the then German foreign minister, Walter Steinmeier, to help Poles and Germans to understand each other better. The German-Polish textbook was the latest project in a whole series of initiatives to develop history textbook in different regions of the world, such as Europe, East Asia, and the Middle East. In the following, I will first provide an overview of the origins, intentions, and character of these textbooks in order to explain what makes these works so special in contrast to conventional textbooks. A historical review will also clarify why history in particular has become the central subject of such transnational projects. Finally, I would like to relate the results of these international experiments back to general textbook design in a national context. What concepts or even models should be drawn from them for general history? Teaching, whose orientation towards the respective national particular historical memories remains permanently challenged in the age of internationalization, integration, or under global perspectives. To this end, I use the image of a laboratory in field that means a field of experimentation for transnational perspectives. Can these projects help to rethink history teaching? History textbooks as national biographies. History textbooks in their usual form seem opposed to the idea of a transnational or even post-national medium. This has to do with both the content and objectives as well as the didactic concepts of teaching. History teaching in its current form is a creation of the nation state which served and continues to serve the interests of identity formation and cohesion. National communities require national narratives, master narratives whose retrospective construction has been characterized by Benedict Anderson and others as imagined communities. These narratives contain guiding ideas, cultural forms, and values of nations. Pupils should use them to understand why the communities in which they live have become the way they are and what concepts they are developing for the future. Textbooks, as the leading media of history lessons, therefore play a central role in the creation of collective consciousness. History is central to this because it's the only subject able to link identity with continuity. Mario Carretero from the University of Madrid has ascribed 6 characteristics to the master narratives of the national as they appear in history lessons, namely exclusion-inclusion, identification processes, the presence of myths as motives or heroic characters, the struggle for freedom or territory, moral orientation, romantic and essentialist concepts of the nation, which pupils also project back historically. Internationally, at least 50% of the content in history lessons is dedicated to the history of one's own nation. In addition, other countries or continents usually only appear if they can be utilized for the national narrative. Since 2007, for instance, the Netherlands has explicitly defined a national canon of 50 topics that all pupils should know when they leave school. The concepts for historical teaching are also nationally oriented. Textbooks are designed for specific aims and methods so that the philosophies of teaching in textbooks and consequently in history lessons differ greatly. In most countries, the combined learning and workbook is the usual type of textbook for the teaching of history. It combines representational text, textual and visual materials, sources for historiography and work tasks. However, the didactic intentions of the elements of a textbook are not identical. Even if the basic structure of the textbook is similar, media and methodological preferences differ considerably. In some countries, maps play an important role as a spatial condensed store of knowledge, while in Germany, for example, textual sources dominate. This page from a Colombian textbook also contains presentation text, historical photographs, and work assignments, but no text source. Orientation and of course work assignments which are oriented towards civic education. During the development phase of the German-Polish textbook, I was asked to comment on the draft maps. I learned that even the idea for the design and content of a textbook map differs greatly between Poland and Germany. Our compilation of signs for concentration and extermination camps in maps in Europe shows that preferences differ from purely symbolic and abstract to emotionalizing concrete and pictorial signatures such as skulls, barbed wires, and chimneys. In many countries, for instance, France, sources are often used to illustrate the textbook text, whereas in Germany, history lessons are used for communication and exchange. In German history textbooks, the representational text forms the basis for independent work with sources, and in recent years, the layout has already separated the illustration and work sections, so that instruction and construction alternate. This also becomes evident in the work assignments. They ask for reproduction, methodological accuracy, precise knowledge of the facts, or are they intended to foster judgment and initiate critical thinking? Certain types of tasks may play a central role in one country while they are completely unknown in the other. In this respect, two areas can be identified that represent particular obstacles for transnational projects. If one is looking for bridges between education and media, one has to deal with both the content of national curricula and learning cultures. Therefore, we have to look at historical reasons to explain why under these circumstances the projects for binational textbooks in the subject of history came into being. Tanya, are we doing fine with the translation? Just asking for the moment.
Yes.
Yes, teacher, yes.
Yes,
Right.
it's,
Yeah.
I'm okay, not too fast. Okay.
It's okay. We are, yeah, we have simultaneous translation, so it's okay.
You can follow. Yeah,
Yeah, yes.
that's
right.
important for me because I don't see you.
Yes.
Professor, the
Yeah,
presenter.
don't worry. We have simultaneous translation, so you can speak.
Okay.
Yeah.
In Spanish and in English, it's possible listen to you.
Okay, fine. I just wanted to know if if I'm too fast or too slow, or if the interpreter can follow. That's always important. Yeah. Okay, but everything is fine. Well, textbook revision and the path to bilateral textbooks. Tying historical education to the national narrative implies explicit and implicit dangers, which became particularly apparent in the catastrophic history of the 20th century. This concerns both the relationship between societies and their internal components. On the one hand, the we also contains the demarcation of the others from countries, peoples, and societies. Cultural dominance, uniqueness, and exclusivity, as well as essentialist ideas about the nation, represent dangers of such historical images, which can be an expression and producer of extreme nationalist ideas. Just a moment, because I've got now this question about the languages here. English. For example, pupils in Germany and France at the end of the 19th century were taught the idea of historical hereditary enmity between the two nations, with terrible consequences in the wars of the 20th century. On the other hand, these images of the national contain hegemonic ideas about the character of the we and the tendency to homogenize according to dominant patterns of national identity. They define who is part and relevant to the national narrative. The history of minorities, the role of immigration, can be seen as irrelevant and remain voids in this narrative. The concept is becoming increasingly questionable, especially in view of the growing multiculturalism of many societies and global interdependencies. In France, for example, there's an intense controversy about the national narrative, the so-called roman national. The idea that historical education, which is with its reflexive potential, could make a significant contribution to those endeavors which, within the framework of comprehensive political, social, and cultural processes, could establish a peaceful coexistence in the present and future after a conflict-ridden past, or secure it in the long term. These considerations formed the starting point for efforts to revise textbooks and ultimately the development of bilateral textbooks. Textbooks revisions began with the initiatives for the so-called detoxification of textbooks in the periods after the First World War. As the teaching of history was seen as partly responsible for the terrible war with millions of people, millions of deaths. The efforts of school reformers under the aegis of the League of Nations were aimed at removing or modifying textbooks passages that led to misunderstandings, misperceptions, or explicit images of other states as enemies. In the 1930s, the first idea and draft for a joint Franco-German textbook emerged. The Organization of American States was particularly active, holding several consequences in the teaching of history and signing a convention on teaching of history in Buenos Aires in 1934. Accordingly, Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile agreed bilateral commissions to revise school history textbooks. After the Second World War, UNESCO, as the successor organization of the League of Nations, took over these initiatives, and since then a great number of meetings have taken place between bilateral and multilateral commissions worldwide. You can see this on these maps in my presentation. In 1974, in one of its recommendations, UNESCO called for the permanent revision of historical and geographical textbooks in particular, to secure that they are accurate, up-to-date, and unprejudiced. Instructions and advices were published on the work and structure of those commissions, such as this UNESCO guidebook on textbook research and textbook revision. The Georg Eckert Institute, now the Leibniz Institute for Educational Media, which was founded in Germany in 1951 and is still the world's only institute for international textbook research, plays a special role in these endeavors. Its research library contains the largest collection of international textbooks and curricula for history, geography, politics, ethics, and religion. This institution has the advantage of being able to initiate and support many international projects without coming under suspicion of dirigistic interests. A specific model has been developed for the work of such commissions, which are usually bilateral and lead from consultations to the formulation of joint recommendations and subsequent activities for the broadest possible implementation of the results. Bilateral and trilateral textbook projects as part of reconciliation. If we think back to the book presentation by the two foreign ministers, the starting point for transnational textbook projects are primarily political intentions. These projects are initiated by countries that have a common conflict-ridden or traumatic past or present. In this respect, they are aimed at international understanding and reconciliation. The trigger is therefore the immediate past. That means contemporary history, the history that is still highly relevant and sometimes controversial in the consciousness of those living today. The history that still produces smoke, as a German historian has put it. Aleida Assmann refers to this approach as a dialogue-based remembrance, which in addition to remembering also serves to overcome past injustices, to leave behind and go beyond. In this respect, the respective status of reconciliation processes between the states and societies involved has an impact on these projects. The Franco-German textbook was the first example of a post-conflict project. Since it was published in 2006 at a time when there was no longer any doubt about Franco-German reconciliation. It was indeed already seen as an European place of remembrance. Therefore, it was regarded as the final point of a long process of binational reconciliation. The design of the textbooks, therefore, follows a consensus model, which categorizes the communalities of the respective histories, primarily within the framework of a European master narrative. In Aleida Assmann's words, the main aim was to create a dialogue-based relationship and mutual recognition and connectivity of national history. The thematic structure of the three chronologically organized volumes from antiquity to the present is based on the quasi-canonical themes with a European framework that were identified throughout Europe in a textbook study in the 1990s. However, this work has shown that too strong a consensualization as a supranational identity offer entails the danger of reducing the view of Europe to hegemonic narratives and of progress. Western Europe, in particular, appears as the incarnation of certain values of freedom, law, and scientific thought, as well as the secularization of state and society. This is striking in the second volume, for example, where there is a detailed section on the abolition of slavery as an European achievement, but no reference to the extraordinary cruelty of the slave trade carried out by Europeans. This is also particularly evident in the third volume, which is based on the future-oriented European idea, which refers politically and normatively to a European community consciousness and proposals for the organization of the continent. When developing the volumes of the textbook, the authors reacted to the criticism of their book and then added more and more sections that offer starting points for Franco-German changes of perspective, comparison or interdependence. One approach is to contrast terminological differences for the same historical events. For example, the textbook shows that there is a fundamental difference between the period in which Germanic groups invaded the Roman Empire from the north, which contributed to its collapse, being referred to as the migration of peoples, in German Völkerwanderung, or the barbarian invasion, also Invasion des Barbares in France, and why both versions are hardly historiographically tenable. Another interesting approach is the comparison of national person myths. Hermann the Cheruscan, a heroic figure of German nationalism because of his victory over the Rome legions, with Paul Vercingetorix, who plays a similar but not identical role in France. In contrast to the consensus model, other initiatives were based on the hope that such textbooks projects could promote or at least flank processes of reconciliation, as Akiyoshi Nishiyama has emphasized for East Asia. In this sense, the Japanese, Korean, Chinese textbook project has taken a further step. As a trinational history book, it also demonstrates the opportunities offered by multilateral developments. After all, there are still considerable conflicts over the culture of remembrance in East Asia, primarily due to Japanese war crimes in the Second World War, which have led to diplomatic crises on several occasions since the 1980s, in which textbook controversies have played a central role. The focus of the book is to make conflicts of remembrance a subject of discussion and disclose controversies even between the representatives of the countries involved. This plays a central role above all in the 8th chapter on war and the people, experiences and memories, in which textbook controversies since the 80s 80s, or disputes of over the Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo and other topics that periodically triggered diplomatic crises in East Asia are discussed. The textbook project is also part of transitional justice with regard to recognizing the suffering and compensation claims of the so-called comfort women, tens of thousands of women who were forced into prostitution by the Japanese army in the territories they occupied during the Second World War. Unlike other bilateral projects, the authors of the book have decided to publish positions and comments on the text of the 8th chapter from each commission. In this way, the book reveals the difficult negotiations and balances that accompanied its publication. Emotionalization through visual media is avoided, so that neither the Nanking massacre nor Hiroshima, among others, are shown in horrific images. Where projects pursue peace education approaches, they attempt to influence current conflicts and trouble spots through textbook work. Such a project can obviously only really succeed where it is already flanked by a discourse of reconciliation and the political conditions remain stable. The Israeli-Palestinian textbook is particularly significant in this context, as in the end, the only solution was to place the two narratives side by side in parallel and unconnected, leaving the reader a space for their own positioning. Here you can see the two sides are just independent from another on the page, and there's no way of bringing these discourses together. And you have here in the middle the lines where you can form your own position. After all, it made the narrative of the other side known, and was thus a sign of recognition of the narrative of both sides. The German-Polish textbook, which was mentioned at the beginning, meant a broadening of perspective for German pupils, as Eastern Europe is just as foreign to them as the history of other parts of the world. The volumes also make it clear that despite their joint membership of NATO and the EU, there are still considerable conflicts between Poland and Germany in terms of the culture of remembrance with regard to the Second World War, which are also openly addressed in this book. At the same time, the textbook's title, Europe, Our History, attempts to minimize the binational restriction and to emphasize the embedding in European perspectives. The German-Polish textbook also contains approaches that refer to multicultural spaces, such as the Polish city of Zamość, and show that there are historically hybrid and multiple identities that cannot be categorized according to modern citizenship laws. The idea of moving actors developed in recent global history is also utilized here. That means the depiction of biographies with cross-border and cross-cultural identities. I come now, my last part begins. New perspectives on historical learning, what's next? Unfortunately, the impact of the bi- and multilateral textbooks on school practice in the participating countries remains small. After all, both the 3-volume Franco-German textbook for the upper secondary school level and the 4-volume of the German-Polish textbook, Europa, unsere Geschichte, Europe, Our History, claim to actually function as regular textbooks in both countries. From the outset, the East Asian work was intended more as a supplement to regular textbooks. The central problem in the implementation of these textbooks are the curricula, which remain nationally oriented and are not coordinated with other national programs. In the Federal Republic of Germany, there are 16 different curricula in the federal states alone due to the federal system of education. In addition, binational textbooks are always a partial undertaking. Other countries are not taking into account, and it will not be possible to create an infinite series of binational textbooks. As a result, these projects are repeatedly criticized for remaining largely prestigious symbols of reconciliation. I want to argue that instead of all setbacks, further developments in this field are desirable, or are most desirable. It has become clear from the examples that these textbooks make an important contribution to history teaching, which urgently requires transnational perspectives in order to provide pupils with orientation in a globalized world in which migration, hybridization of cultural ways of life, interdependencies, and networks with their manifold political, economic, and social interactions are undeniably realities. The confrontation with the narratives of the others represents an unsettling but productive experience in many respects, which requires tolerance and ambiguity, of ambiguity. Alterity and not harmonization forms the starting point. This also results in reflective moments about the centering or limitations of the narrative in one's own country, which can then ultimately lead to a broadening of views through integration into one's own perspective. Insights can relate to historical projections, myth-making, and essentializations, as well as the instrumentalization of such historical images for historical policy purposes. In a research project, we gathered parallel findings when analyzing transnational student projects with German, Israeli, and Polish students. In some cases, they experienced that others think history differently as a shock, and they only realized the vital function of history as a part of their identity in these debates. Finally, I want to stress three central aspects for further developments, which can use these books as laboratories for transnational perspectives by integrating them into new contexts and open three fields of transformation. Firstly, the transformation of classical textbooks by opening to transnational perspectives. Secondly, the transformation of concepts of space in history teaching. And thirdly, the transformation of the role of the textbook in history teaching in general. Firstly, the ideas in these international textbooks can be transferred to regular textbooks in order to transcend the boundaries of national narratives and to open national containers of historical thought. The ideas in the textbooks can be used as laboratories or treasure troves for the development of transnational perspectives. They offer particularly interesting approaches for this because they do not aim to address a great number of regional or national examples, which history lessons cannot do, but above all address multi-perspectivity as a central principle of historical thinking. For the development of transnational learning materials, these textbooks will contain a pool of possible figurations. Considering the Asian example, multilateral perspectives seem a very promising approach. One could also start with additional digital material to textbooks. Secondly, the transformation of concepts of space in history teaching. Binational textbook projects depart from the spatial concepts of national history and open new perspectives. This should lead to conclusions that are more general. The spatial references of region, nation, continent, or global, with its partly conflicting loyalties, should be conceived in new references and interdependencies by broadening perspectives. Ideas of container space should be called into question, which means limiting the narrative of the space within national borders. No society, culture, or civilization develops out of itself autonomously, as right-wing extremist movements would have us to believe. The world has always been interconnected, and the interrelationship between exogenous influences and endogenous developments and interdependencies must always be kept in mind. New spatial concepts like the revolution in the Atlantic, for instance, connect revolutions in Europe, Haiti, North and Latin America. Thirdly, the transformation of the role of the textbook in history teaching in general. Mistrust occasionally your textbooks, has said a famous German author, Erich Kästner. Dealing with other narratives has the potential to change the function of the textbook. By contrasting different national perspectives, it also reveals its own attachment to the national narrative and loses its authoritative character. Never before has a textbook, like in the East Asian case, so openly communicated the negotiation process involved in the creation of its text. Also in this respect, the transformation of textbooks can help to further a central goal of history didactics, namely to replace naive identification with self-orientation, thus enabling our pupils to reflect of different identities in a complex world. This is connected to the idea that history is not necessarily a means of promoting national thinking and action, but can also represent a contribution to an attitude that endures otherness and promotes tolerance of ambiguity. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Andy. I had one question, but for the times, I like other person formulate the question, teachers, or finally this presentation in this moment. Okay, Cesar, what is your question? Cesar, what is your question? ¿Tú puedes escribirla en el chat? Por favor. O le abrimos un minuto para que César pueda hacer la pregunta. César, ¿ya puedes hablar? Adelante.
Okay. Give me a second, please.
Te escuchamos, adelante.
through the canal of English in language.
¿Vas a hacer la pregunta en inglés o en español?
I still haven't got the translation not.
Listo. Regálame un segundo. Okay. Professor, I would like to know your opinion about the Big History Project or World History Connected or World History Project. In this is real edge to teach the transnational history beyond the national boundaries and to interconnect people of all nationalities.
Do you mean a specific project or the projects I presented?
No, the Big History Project. Do you know this project?
Tell me about it.
Okay, I would share with you a link to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me have a look.
Okay, and World History Project, Felipe Fernandez Armesto, an historian, has been publishing in a long time, for decades, some textbooks that realize or do an exploration from thousands of years of history and publish with some big publishers, editors, to spread this approach for all history students of school. And I want to ask you if you know these projects.
Have you sent the link?
Okay.
Yeah, if you send the link, it sounds interesting. Yeah. Because I don't know this project, and I'm interested to know, is it sort of, does it try to cover all histories of different parts of the globe? Is that the idea?
Yes.
Yes.
Probably the approach of global history, transnational history, that are some approaches from some. I don't know if news in the historiography, but in the last decades received some developments as methodological approaches to research and so on. But recently, probably the last decade ago, these approaches are adapting to the teachers and the schools to review some international, transnational, or global and world approaches. And of course, I would share with you.
Okay.
With all of you.
Yeah, sounds interesting. I mean, in all these projects, the question is, well, we put the question, what are they about? What is the idea, you know? And it's the discussion about global history in Germany is very vivid, and what is in our regard, transnational history is mainly about multi-perspectivity, about changing perspectives of looking at history through the perspective of the others. Yeah, and it's not about covering now covering all histories of the world, or a great number of histories, which only do not lead to a coherent idea, yeah, of history, or to sort of a reflective idea of history. But I see this what I have said, the link you've sent, and I will have a closer look at it. Thank you for giving me this hint, and I'll have a closer look at it. But there's another comment by Jose Rubio here.
Ok. Nosotros recibiremos las otras preguntas y las dialogaremos con el con el profesor Badía, aprovechando que él va a estar en Colombia un tiempo más. Teacher, we received the other questions, and we look the other opportunity for continuing with this in the conversation about the textbook, the history. I had anything question about your interesting presentation, but for the times, the difficulty with connectivity, for now, we finishing in this moment this presentation. Thank you very much for your visitings in Colombia and Andes University. Thank you very much.
Yeah, what is in I have here by Jose Rubio a comment in Spanish.
Sí.
Okay, could you translate it?
Okay. Moment.
En el marco del conflicto interimperialista en curso de la imagen.
Hey, Oswald, yes, we can receive some questions in Spanish and we will translate it for you. So if anyone...
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Yes, no worries.
Please.
Si alguien tiene alguna pregunta en el público y quiere hacerla llegar vía chat, nosotros la podremos traducir para el invitado.
Now I heard a Spanish version. I still haven't got the knob to go switch to the other language.
You prefer I read the question, the teacher Rubio, in Spanish or English?
In English.
Okay.
Is there a version in English too? Yeah.
The question is, in the context of the ongoing inter-imperialist conflicts, the emergence of Holland process of despedagogización, that what didactic aspect do you consider valuable and their intention on supporting critical thinking in the design of textbooks in Historia 5? In this moment, in this